I'm going to try and finish up Matthew chapter 11. Excuse me. The invitation begins in verse 28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Talked about that. The Old King James Version, instead of burden, has heavy laden, so that we're not talking about this backpack, I carry it. No, this is a heavy load. I'll give you rest. And then he goes on, and we get insight into what kind of rest Jesus is talking about. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. That's a fairly common idea, that you would take the yoke of a rabbi, meaning you would come under the tutelage, the instruction, and a little bit more, the authority of the rabbi. And learn from me. I know I'm replowing ground, but I just have to say, I am such a slow learner. I don't like that about myself, but it's who I am, how I'm wired, I guess. No excuse. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Soul rest is a dimension of rest that, well, my observation is not very many people in the entire world experience soul rest. And I believe for us on this side of the cross, how we experience what causes this soul rest is the grace of Christ, the grace of God. I talked about it last time. I love talking about this little 3-word greeting that Paul uses in virtually all of his epistles, his letters, in what we have as a New Testament, where he writes grace and peace. I think peace is the outcome of grace. And when I find peace, I find rest for my soul. And then he goes on and finishes, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, I don't want to gloss this over, but I don't want to, bend it and make more of it but there's a lot here. My yoke is easy. Now, the two kinds of yoke that I see here. One is the yoke of an ox, which is either one ox pulling a plow, or a wagon, or but he's pulling, or it could be 2 oxen, or the yoke of this relationship with a rabbi. If the yoke is fitted well to the ox, they notice that there's a drag, they're having to pull, but it is less difficult for that ox if the yoke is properly fitted to them than if it's just any old yoke that they can put their hands on. Okay, well, the easy yoke of a rabbi has everything to do with the nature, character, personality of the rabbi. Some rabbis could make learning anything difficult. Did you ever have a teacher like that? Somewhere along in your educational experience, a teacher who was much more in love with their material than they were in love with their students. And the idea of their students actually learning it, the indication here is Jesus says, as a rabbi, my yoke is easy. And I think on one level, my experience with the yoke of Jesus is that when I accept it, when I truly come to him and take his yoke, the way he teaches me often has to do with giving me this gift and opportunity to desire to learn what he's teaching. And that is a function of grace. But the lessons are not always easy. But the yoke is this relationship that I have with Jesus, my teacher, the Holy Spirit, my teacher. It's easy in the sense that if I truly, all of who I am truly shows up with what I can understand of him, then the relationship is easy. Does that make any sense at all? No relationship is without bumps. No relationship, no healthy relationship is without a little bit of tension from time to time. But a healthy relationship is generally easy. Okay, my burden is light. I don't know what to make of that, really. I have friends and family for whom the burden is not light. It's difficult. Their life is a burden, and a heavy burden, and it is not light. It's difficult. I don't want to say, well, that's not what Jesus meant, or was recorded improperly, or all I'm going to say is Jesus' yoke is easy because of grace, and his burden is light because of grace. And there are a lot of times when the burden that Jesus says is light only seems light in the rearview mirror, in retrospect. Did you get through it? Yeah. Was it hard? Yeah. But you got through it. So how'd you get through it? I partnered with grace. I opened my heart in humility. You know, Jesus said he is humble of heart. I want to be like my teacher. I opened my heart and humbled myself, and God's grace carried me through. I don't know what else to make of it. I've heard people say, well, if you just have to think of it differently, like, this is not that big a deal. Believe me, you know this, I know this from our own experience. There are times when it is a big deal. It's difficult, heavy, hard. Well, move on, Steve. chapter 12. Dun, 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 dun. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. Key, two keys, grain fields, Sabbath. And here's why. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. That's no big deal. I mean, I didn't do it very often, but once or twice, I was on the farm with friends and picked off a head of wheat, and you sift it between your hands and blow out the chaff, and then there's the wheat, and you just pop it in and chew it up. It's not great, especially for a kid who my taste buds were much more attuned to Twinkies and cupcakes and beef. But in an agrarian society, that was no big deal, except was on the Sabbath. And the Pharisees, verse 2, when the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. You're kidding. The Pharisees were letter of the law people. They believed that their standing with God was fully and completely and only the function of their obedience to the minutia and letter of the law. And they made it their life's goal to, not only observe the law that meticulously, but to criticize those who they felt didn't. And this little act of plucking some grain off the head and sifting it with their hands and then eating it, that was work. Really. And you can't work on the Sabbath at all. The second thing I see in this is, what in the world were the Pharisees doing where they saw the disciples walk through a grain field, take some heads of grain and eat what? On the Sabbath. And see, this is my opinion, if the Pharisees were truly observing the Sabbath in the way they were setting it up, that the disciples were not observing the Sabbath, then they would have been resting. They would have been at rest. They were not at rest. They were on hawking duty. They were, I have to guess, that they had been following Jesus. And you could only walk a certain number of steps on the Sabbath. I mean, they had it down to that. But they saw it, and they said, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. And then Jesus answers. He does this all the time. He kind of pushes the swinging door back in their direction. Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that on the Sabbath, the priests in the temple desecrate the day? How do they do that? By working. And yet are innocent? I tell you that one greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Coming back to that next time. I'll see you then on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.